Hi, I'm Andy Ornberg. I work here in the online learning department, and I am here today to present to you this student success tips for that faculty can use. I know that this was originally billed as the 5 issues we hear most about from students, and that is what we're going to talk about today. But I like this title better because the whole point of this is to give you some information that will be useful to you in how you approach your students and how you create the experience in Desire to Learn of your class that will help students with some of the biggest issues they face that get in their way to succeeding. And notice the heading I have here, I should say the subtitle, without adding to your workload. So I don't want to give you a bunch of things that you have to do in addition to what you're doing already. The point here a little bit is, on the one hand, I think just having a clear sense of what it is that is getting in the way for students with succeeding in their online classes will help you when you're just thinking about and doing the day-to-day things you do for your classes, and how to maybe orient those things a little more to help students to succeed. Another part of this presentation is to give you some referrals. Many of these you may already know about, but some you may not, and so may have some more tools, so to speak, and places you can refer students to get help instead of you having to be the one to do, some of the heavy lifting around some of the issues we're going to talk about. So hopefully in the end this may actually serve to reduce your workload a little bit because you know about the resources out there to refer students to. So with that, let's get going. All right, so this first slide asks, what barriers do you see students have that interfere with them being successful? So I want you to just think about that for a second. What would you say is the number one barrier that you see, if you had to rate them all? What would be the top one you would say that you see more often than any other one that gets in the way of students succeeding? Okay. On the next slide, I have the answer to that question based on one study I just looked at recently, and got some interesting information. So let's take a look at that and see how that lines up with your thoughts on the matter. Okay, so what this study shows is that, at least in the case of the students, and faculty who took part in it, that students say, when these are students who did poorly, who failed or did poorly in an online class, the students say that what was the biggest barrier to them succeeding in their class was lack of time management skills. That's what students says got in their way more than anything else. When faculty were asked what gets in the way of your students more than anything else, they say technology skills, the ability to use the learning management system, Desire to Learn in our case, that's the biggest issue. So interesting, a little bit different perception between students and faculty, although I will say the perception isn't the difference isn't as big as it first might appear, because faculty name time management skills as the second highest issue, and students also name technology skills as one of the barriers, just not as high as time management skills was. So we're going to take a look at both of these issues, break them down, and talk more about them, and a few more issues as we go along here. But first, before we get to those specifically, I want to talk about what the national surveys and research shows, and I see in my interaction with students all the time. I imagine you all do too, to some degree. And that is a myth that students come to online learning with oftentimes. And that myth is that online classes are easier than face-to-face classes. I think maybe that's a result of seeing all advertising all the time from for-profit online schools that make it sound very easy. Get a degree in nuclear physics in your spare time, and you know they lead people into having this idea that online classes aren't going to be as challenging as face-to-face classes. But for whatever reason, it is certainly, the national data shows it's a big issue, and it's something that's believed pervasively amongst students before they take their first online class. This quote sums it up pretty well. This is from a student who was in one of our classes this spring, and he dropped his online class, and here's the reason he gave that he sent in writing about it. He said, "I felt the class had a heavier workload than a 3-credit class should. The first 2 weeks I had already put in about 6 hours of studying." Okay, so here's a student that obviously showed up with that idea that online classes should be a breeze, they shouldn't take that much time. So in practical terms, how that's useful is to do the best you can, which I'm sure you're doing some of this already, but as much as you can to make it clear right from the outset. Online classes are not easier than face-to-face classes. You're going to be busy in this class, and so please plan for that. Something I use all the time when I'm explaining to students, and I've had, I can think of several occasions where I had students get big eyes when I told them when I told them the following, and that is that figure if you're taking a 3-credit online class, you need to put aside about 10 hours a week for that class, okay? And how I got that number is you all may be familiar with the old rule of thumb that for every credit a class is worth, you want to set aside 2 or 3 hours for homework, all right? So in online classes, you need to add, take that 2 or 3 hours of homework and add the in-class time you would have had. So now you're talking 3 or 4 hours a week for every credit the class is worth. So if you take a 3-credit class, that works out to about 10 hours a week. And so if you can communicate in some concrete way to students right off the bat that here's what you're facing in terms of the amount of work that is expected in the class, that may help to alleviate, to give students a little reality check and adjust their perspective and get them planning appropriately for what they're going to need to do to succeed in their class. Okay, next, back to some of these barrier issues that we were talking about a minute ago. The first one I'm going to start with is time management skills. And I would say, based on my experience anyway, that you could break down the time management skills issues into 2 subcategories. The first one is students don't manage their time very well because they have ongoing crises that interfere with their ability to get things done. So students who are living in crisis for one reason or another, of course, inhibits their ability to manage time. And the second category is students have poor planning and personal efficacy skills. So I want to talk about each one of these. Before I jump into this, I would say about the first one, I don't have any data to back this up, but I will bet that we get more we get more students in online classes who are having personal difficulties and crises because, and this related back to this unconscious maybe assumption that online classes are easier. So I suspect oftentimes students say, well, my life is upside down, things are going crazy, I have all kinds of problems I have to deal with in my personal life, so I'll take an online class so I don't have to go to school any day, and it won't be as demanding, and I can probably get by with that a little bit easier. More easily. And so that's just my speculation, so whatever you think of that. But let's go to that topic and talk a little bit more about it. Okay, so first, most important maybe thing about this issue is when you have students that are having crises and personal problems, you are not expected to be a counselor, all right? So that is something I hear from faculty. I've heard, I hear faculty bring it up occasionally, both verbally and in writing. And I think, and at times I can detect some resentment under there because I think maybe the faculty feel like either their students are expecting them to be counselors, or the system, the Front Range system or the college, Colorado system expects them to be counselors. And so I want to reinforce right now, you are not expected to be a counselor, and it's not your job to sit down and be a student's therapist, okay? So the good news here is that I've got a screenshot on this slide from our website talking about the crisis and stress management resources we have for students here. So we have counselors, trained counselors here that students can see to talk about stress issues and crisis issues and help them manage that, all right? And so So what your role is to, like I have written here, to the degree you're comfortable, when a student seems to have be having personal problems, or if they just come right out and tell you, it's not your job to be their counselor, but um, i- you know what I would suggest you do is to tell them that we do have crisis counselors available here, and to refer them to those counselors. Um, I would really recommend that you tell them that you will have someone get a hold of them, and get a hold of the crisis staff, in the advising department, and they will reach out to the student, rather than just telling the student contact these people, because if students who are in crisis and are struggling often are having a problem getting things accomplished, and often they won't, even if they think it's a good idea, they won't take the time and energy to do it. So if you have someone contact them, it's more likely they're going to get in touch with someone who can help them out. So to the degree you're comfortable, um, uh, uh, mentioning that you think that would be useful to a student, and giving them that referral, that would be very helpful. Okay. So next, I want to talk about another page we have on our website called FRCC Cares. All right, and there are resources there for you. How to handle certain situations with students that come up, plagiarism, attendance, things like that. And there are also some things on this page for students. Uh, the good news is it's here, and it will continue to be here in some form. However, I talked to the staff are in charge of this page, and they're reorganizing it, so it may not look this way for long. It's probably going to change, but it's there, and it can be a resource for you and students. The one thing I do want to talk about right now is the student of concern form. Many of you are probably very well informed about that already. That anytime there's any issue, students cheating, um, other problems, with students, your faculty and staff are encouraged to fill out one of these and submit it to the Dean of Student Services. And so that's this form right here. And something I just want to point out is that there is a section in here to check off concerning behavior. So if someone seems to be suffering from anxiety, depression, emotional outbursts, suicidal thoughts, things like that, you can check this off. And so if you're really not comfortable talking to a student, and giving, and trying to refer them to the counselors here, you can fill out this form, and if you check off one of these boxes and submit it to the Dean of Student Services office, it will make their way to one of the crisis counselors, and that crisis counselor will contact the student. So definitely worth doing. Oftentimes, if you don't give the student any clue that you're going to do that, then it's a little bit of a shock when they get a call, and it can feel, depending on the student, like a little bit of a violation in that. Better to be safe than sorry, but if you can let the student know ahead of time that you're going to make that referral, all the better. Okay. So next, I want to talk about the other half of the time management issues, which is students who are poor planners. All right. Some students just don't have very good time management skills, and and in this case, they do have the Learning Resource Center that centers on the different campuses we're going to talk about in a minute, that do offer students some help with planning skills and time management skills. So that's an option. What I want you to know is that I saw a study recently, and what the study was looking at, what the study asked the students who are taking online classes, what is it that you would want that would be most useful to you in preparing for your online class? What do you want to know, or what do you need as you enter into your first day of an online class, or that you got by the time you started your class? And the students said the number one response to this from the students is they want to know right up front what the instructor's expectations are. Okay. Now, I believe that you all are certainly doing your best to make that clear already. All right. So, but just having that awareness that seems to be that's a response that's the studies I looked at are showing is a big request from students. So even though instructors at times, I'm sure, are by and large working hard to do that, a lot of time it still doesn't get clear to students. And I think, this goes back to the students showing up with the myth that online classes are easier. And so, and then they get into the class and they find out after a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks that, whoa, it's not as easy as I thought it was going to be. So whatever you can do to really make that crystal clear of what your expectations are right off the bat, and understand, and helping students to understand how much work there is in the class and what they need to do will help them adjust their priorities and their own expectations, so that they can be prepared and have enough resources and time set aside to get things done. As an ancillary idea here, consider putting the primary deadlines for your class on the D2L calendar. So there's a calendar in D2L for each class, and I'm not saying you should put every single little thing on that calendar, but just some of the main dates. In fact, putting too much on the calendar may be overwhelming for the students. So just putting in there some of the main due dates and things for students that they can refer to may help some of the students who struggle with their planning skills and that, to stay a little more clear on what's going on. So using that calendar and letting the students know it's there wouldn't be a bad idea. Okay. So next, we want to talk about that managing technology issue. So essentially what we're talking about here is students who get to a class and they don't know how to use the Desire to Learn system. They aren't really very computer literate in some cases to start with, and they are overwhelmed and they can't navigate and they can't find the things they need, and they wind up crashing and burning, or at least doing very poorly in the class. Okay, so the good news is that I am in the process right now of creating a class, so to speak, in D2L, which is called Orientation to Online Classes. And we are going to require that all students who are taking an online class for the first time here at Front Range complete that orientation by the time they start their class, or within the first few days of starting their class. All right. And so when I say require, we're telling them that it's required, but there's no enforcement. So if they do it, that'll be very useful to them. But if they don't do it, no one's going to be looking over their shoulder, badgering them to get it done. So so two things. One is, I think, we're implementing that this spring, and I think it's going to, you'll probably see a lower percentage of students having problems with figuring out Desire to Learn, because we'll have students going through this. The other thing that would be particularly useful, though, is to let students know right up front the first day that if this is your first online class and you haven't finished the orientation to online classes in course in D2L, that you need to do that right away so that you know what you're doing, and just encouraging those students to get that done so they can navigate the course. All right. For now, like I said, there's no enforcement, and we're telling students we want them to do it, and we'll see. I hope to eventually, I'm kind of an evangelist for making this mandatory, so I'm hoping eventually it'll be a mandatory requirement for students. We know that colleges that have mandatory orientations, when they implement those mandatory orientations, they have immediate, usually 8 or 9% on average, what I've seen, increases in student retention, and an 8 or 9% jump in average grade for students. So I'm hoping to have this mandatory eventually, but for now we're just putting it out there and telling students to do it. So hopefully we can get them as much as possible to finish it. Okay. Next, related to managing technology, one of the things that I hear most in my office is students who are calling me because they're having trouble with what I'm calling here add-on software or websites. So additional software or websites above and beyond D2L that students need to get into to complete assignments. Often these are things that are provided by publishers of textbooks and that. So I have up here an example of my MathLab Plus, and I can actually help students a little bit with that, because it's it's used so often in math courses. But by and large, us folks in online learning don't know anything about those special um, websites and software you're using in a class. When they call us and say, I can't figure out how to use such and such a system or such and such software, we usually just refer them back to the instructor because we don't know how to do it. So as much as, again, I'm sure you're giving instructions to students on how to use this stuff, but whatever you can do to make it crystal clear to them how to use any additional websites or software that you're using to get class stuff done up front will be useful to the students and save everyone headaches in the long run. A little footnote here. I'm sure most of you are aware of this already, but just in case some of you aren't, the latest versions of Firefox and Chrome are blocking content from other websites when D2L tries to import them. So when students click on a link to something outside of D2L, Firefox and Chrome will often block them because they're not HTTPS. The S stands for security or secure, and they're just HTTP sites. And if that's the case, they get blocked, and then students can't figure out why they're not getting to, why the link isn't working, and creates a lot of headaches. And so that's the problem when you have students telling you or often probably is the problem when you have students telling you they click on the link and they can't get it. There's a little shield shaped icon in the search bar that students can click on that shield and they can disable the block and they'll get it, but a lot of times they don't know to look for that. I didn't when it first happened to me. And so an ongoing issue we're going to have to live with for now anyway with Firefox and Chrome. Okay, so next issue I want to talk about is students who are having trouble with the course material. Of course, we have students that struggle sometimes. Their writing skills aren't good, or they're struggling with the math is over their head and they can't figure it out. And so, again, the good news, we have learning resources and support programs at all three of the main campuses and at Brighton also. And we provide free tutoring. Students can sign up for tutors for English and math for sure, but not just English and math, for many other subjects. And we also have resource labs where students can, academic support labs, I guess the best way to put it, where students can drop in at those labs and get help without appointments or anything like that ahead of time. And so on the Learning Resources and Support Programs page, the first two links are for tutoring and academic support labs. And so promote those to your students, let them know they're out there, and it will help students when they're struggling with course material have some other resources and people that can give them some assistance. The next thing I want to mention is the Online Writing Center. And most of you probably know about this already, but in case there's some people that don't, I think this is the greatest thing since sliced bread. If you click on the resources heading on the black toolbar in Desire to Learn, there's a link here that says Online Writing Center, and when students click on that, a page comes up where they can upload a draft of a document that they're working on, that they have to submit for a grade, and they send it off, and a writing professional will look at that and send it back to the student with suggestions on how to improve their writing, how to improve the paper within 24 business hours. Okay, I think this is a wonderful thing. We just implemented it this year, and my day job is in online learning, but outside of my regular job, I do teach psychology classes here at Front Range, and my experience has been that when I pointed out to students this existed and I got them to use it, it really helped some of them to get better grades on some of the papers they turned in. And I know I've had some students who got better grades just because of this resource. All right, so I think it's a great thing to promote to your students. The third thing on my list here is early alerts, so first thing I have to do is once again apologize, because our early alerts, any of you who tried to use them this semester, when you went into the eWolf to fill out an early alert form on a student, you found out it didn't work. Again, we did everything to try to get it to work right, and we thought we had it all fixed, but it didn't. So I apologize for that. But do know that if you do submit an early alert to to us that we do follow up on it rigorously. We make at least 3 attempts to get a hold of a student, find a way to get in touch with them, and talk to them about what's going on for them, and try to make a plan that will help them succeed in their class. I take it before they hired myself and the other online student retention specialists this last year to deal with some of these issues that sometimes early alerts weren't followed up on very well when faculty submitted them. But now that we have the staffing, I can assure you you're worth it. If you take the time to fill one of these out, it's going to be followed up on promptly and rigorously, and it's a good service for the students. So please take advantage of that. Before we move on from this, I just want to mention that at this point we do have these tutoring resources and resource labs, but the student has to come into one of the campuses to access them. We are exploring at this point, though, online tutoring services. I have an appointment just this coming Thursday to review one of the to look at another service. We've been interviewing, so to speak, several services that we might want to use that will provide online tutoring, so students who are online learners and maybe it's not practical for them to get to the campus can use an online tutoring service to help them. So we will let you know more about that as that becomes a reality. Okay. So let's see if I can get my next slide to come up here. And I just want to go over real quick. I'm sure you've all seen this information a million times. It's on the main page in Desire to Learn. It's information for students on where to get some phone numbers and email addresses where they can get help. But I just want to clarify and make sure that you all understand what students get when they call these numbers or use the email. So where it says technical assistance at the top, one of the great things about this is it's 24/7. Students can use it any time of day or night. And when they call this number, they get Perceptus, which is the name of an organization that contracts with many schools and other places to provide technical support for Desire to Learn and other technical programs that students and people use. And so when students can call here to get basic technical questions answers. If students having a question about Desire to Learn or about their eWolf account, they can call this number and get some help. They also can get their password reset for Desire to Learn if they somehow something gets messed up and they need a new password. All right, they can't figure out how to get that themselves. So they're useful for those basic technical questions. This email address and these two phone numbers here on other questions, that actually goes to the online learning department. Rings my desk. These numbers will ring my desk or some of the other staff that work in the online learning department, and we are here to go above and beyond just simple technical questions. We can answer technical questions sometimes for students, but we're here for when students may be struggling with a class and they need some help and support. They need to access resources that we know about all or most of the resources around Front Range that we can refer students to. Students can call us, for planning ahead for next semester and or if they haven't taken online classes before, they can call us and we'll help them, plan what they're doing. So we kind of try to take care of students as much as we can that students come up with. It's over and above technical questions. Okay. So next, our last subject I want to talk about is instructor presence. All right, and as I said here, instructor presence is turning out to be. I'm seeing it more and more in the research and the studies. Instructor presence is a key determiner of student success in online classes. So I may be overstating the proposition a bit when I'm not asking or saying that you need to do a Vulcan mind meld with your students, but when students feel connected to their faculty, they do better in their classes, and when they don't feel connected, they don't do as well. And so on that note, I'm going to show you a slide that you may remember seeing before. This was put together by Eric Salahub and for a presentation that he put out in his faculty coaching website and sent out to instructors maybe a month or two ago. And what we have here is this is data that we got back from Front Range students who were explaining what worked for them in their online class, or what things worked that they got from their online instructors. Okay, what things that did they get from their instructor that they thought really helped them succeed? And it's broken down into three categories. This blue circle represents feedback and assessment, and so students whose responses fit into this blue circle, or were students who were saying the feedback and assessment, I got on my assignments, and that really helped me succeed from and this green circle is content, instructor generated content. Students say the content in my course that the instructor created was really, really helpful and really interesting and really useful. Okay, and then this pink circle up here, these are comments we got from students that relate to instructor presence. And as you'll notice, there by far the instructor presence had way, way more feedback that elements of the instructor's presence in the course what helped make the student successful as compared to feedback and assessment and instructor and generated content. So instructor presence plays a huge part, and this is what we're seeing in all the national research too. And you can see some of these comments. Students said, my instructor was passionate, excited, and inspired me to learn, or they were caring, or they made a personal connection with me, that they were funny. The instructor was an active presence in discussions. That was the number one thing on here, and that's what I hear from students often. Oftentimes I hear the complaints, and oftentimes one of the complaints I hear from students that seems to make them less interested in the classes, my instructor really isn't that present or interested in the discussions. It seems they just give me a grade. And so when instructors participate in the discussion board and are really active, students really appreciate that. Okay, so whatever you can do. Now again, I said earlier that this isn't about giving you more work to do. So instead of doing more, I would suggest that a different approach would be to think about the different kinds of technology you can use that helps make you more kind of present and will help you connect better with your students. So for example, videos. If you can, instead of writing out instructions, if you could make a video that gives students instructions, students feel more connected to the instructors who they can see their face and hear their voice. One thing I discovered, I used last spring for the first time, that I just thought was the greatest thing, and my students did too, was audio feedback. When you have students submit assignments into the Dropbox and you use Turnitin, you can leave the student audio feedback, and I just saw an article in the Chronicles to Higher Education 2 or 3 weeks ago that talked about the fact that when instructors who use audio feedback and give audio feedback as opposed to written feedback, that the students do better with audio feedback from the student side, and from the instructor side, instructors report it takes them about a third of the time to leave audio feedback as compared to leaving written feedback. So it seems like a win-win for everybody. And and so when students hear your voice and they hear you're talking to them, it seems more personal and it connects them more to you than written feedback. So using technology is a way to help students feel more connected to you without increasing your workload. Okay. One little point I want to make is, if you read a lot of the the information on online learning and teaching online classes, there's a lot of emphasis about creating community among the students. But as you see here, only 3 comments out of all the comments here were about what a great community I had in my class amongst other students. And I've been seeing it more and more in the literature, is that we want to make up, so to speak, for the distance that online learning puts between students and their class, with doing what we can to create a community amongst students. And I'm not saying it's a bad thing; it's a good thing when we can do it. But it really isn't what matters to students, and it really isn't what helps them succeed. This information that we got from Eric, and also the things I'm seeing in the research, is saying that students need to feel connected to their instructor, not to the other students. That's what matters most, for what that's worth. All right. So that's everything I had to present to you, and I hope this was useful to you. Please, you can look me up in the staff directory in the Front Range website, and if you have questions or comments, any kind of feedback, please call me or write me. That would be great. I'm going to post uh, this information on the faculty um, uh, on the faculty resources D2L page, so it'll be accessible there. And I hope it was useful for you, and I hope you get something that will help your students out of all this that we've talked about today. Thanks. Bye.